Well, welcome everyone. I see 44 people here, and I know that folks come and go over the course of the hour, so I'm sure that number 45 will continue to grow as we go forward. Thank you for all you do to make every year end successful for Friendship Place. Your generosity, your spirit, the support you provide makes our work possible. And I thank you also to all of our staff members who are on this call. I have chatted with a few of you already, and I see another few other folks who've come in here. Thank you, and you all do the work, and that is so vital. This first webinar of the year is really sort of a start off. What are we looking at in 2023, both nationally and in the city of Washington and the DC area, and of course, very specifically here at Friendship Place. This is a chance for you to learn about what we're up to with your support, and for those who are on the team, with your hard work. So Jean-Michel will talk about what we're doing and what's going on, but this is also meant to be very active. So as the opportunities, as the thoughts come to you, please put questions in the chat, or perhaps even if I don't know, Jean-Michel, how long you think you might go, if it's best to wait till after you're done to put questions in the chat, whatever you feel more comfortable. But understand we won't be able to get to the questions till after Jean-Michel speaking. But this is your questions are what's going to make this a vibrant hour. So without further ado, I'm going to toss to Jean-Michel. Let him take it from here. I'll mute myself and just keep jotting down the names of folks who are here. Jean-Michel, over to you.
Yes, well, thank you, Chris, and thank you all for being online with us this afternoon for this conversation. We appreciate your support, and we thought it would be a good way to start the year to talk about the state of homelessness in the US. So this presentation is going to have three parts. I'm going to start with a history of the field and how some of the current practices came to be, how the field developed through the last 40 years or so. And then in the second part, I'm going to tell you about the counts that we perform every year in the DC area for HUD and how these figures are used for planning purposes, how they also guide our work in developing new programs, for instance. And then the third part will be about All-In, the federal strategic plan to prevent and end homelessness that was released by the Biden-Harris administration and US Interagency Council on Homelessness in December, just about a little less than a month ago. And that plan that is going to have a significant impact over the next 2 years. So the last 2 years of this current administration. Three parts give us an opportunity, of course, if you really want to ask a question at the end of each part, we can break that up so that you don't have to listen to me for an extended period of time. And so I'll be happy to take some questions if you have any. So a history of the field. Well, in many ways, homeless services, of course, has grown tremendously in the last 40 years. It has borrowed from different disciplines, and in many ways, in my eyes, it's one of the most recent disciplines in human services. A while ago, in the 60s, for instance, services for people with developmental disabilities and people with psychiatric diagnoses were developed during deinstitutionalization and after, when we brought people out of the mental health hospitals and the state institutions. Senior services has grown, other fields as well. And homeless services, in my eyes, is one of the most recent disciplines. We have borrowed from different ends of the field. We have borrowed from developmental disabilities, for instance, the notion of self-determination. So letting people drive their own planning process, plan for their own lives according to their wishes, preferences, and putting them as a principal actor of the rehabilitation process. Self-determination is a phrase that came from that field. The notion of voluntary services, which impacts everything we do at Friendship Place, because people in our programs are there on a voluntary basis. They may continue to do that and stay with us, or may stop the services at any one point. And this is a crucial notion, obviously, given that, in years past, in decades past, many people were served against their will and held in places they couldn't come out of, like the state hospitals, for instance. Also, progress was made in 1973 when the Rehabilitation Services Administration was created out of the existing group of offices in the federal system. And for instance, the plan that some of you on the staff developed with participants, this service plan with people's goals and interventions, etc., did not exist before 1973. It's hard to believe that somehow you could organize services without a plan, but it's true. So for homeless services in particular, 40 years ago, you had a lot of hots and cots. The hot meal you got at 7 p.m. when you entered the shelter, the cot you slept on, and out again at 7 a.m. And then people decided that with services, people would make progress and could gain housing again. So services were introduced. And then after that, housing. Of course, people were homeless. The solution was housing, as it still is now. But housing with a lot of conditions. And so this was the abstinence model. In the abstinence model, for those of you who don't know, somebody in addiction would present and we would ask that person if they had been using drugs or alcohol in the last 180 days. And if they had, we simply couldn't help them move forward into their own apartment. You had to own your apartment. And there was a sense that a moral judgment was attached to housing that we have now removed thanks to Housing First. This was very problematic in that we know from our knowledge of addiction that people do relapse occasionally when they have an addiction, that in fact a relapse is a part of addiction for many people. And so we were going against really what we knew, and we were leaving people behind in the cold, in the heat. And this was problematic for us. And so this new model that came into the district from New York, and the district adopted it at the district level in 2008, and then it spread to the national level, is Housing First. It's basically, it's very simple. You don't have to earn the apartment. You don't have to earn the housing. It is believed that you deserve the housing because as a single person, you are highly vulnerable based on the number of health criteria. Or as a family, you're prioritized because you're in a situation that makes it so that you absolutely need to be housed immediately and permanently. Housing First works with services from a provider like Friendship Place and with a voucher that the person controls. So the person has control over the voucher, the family as well, and the services, and may opt, for instance, to go into services with another organization at any one point, or just to keep a voucher without the services. And that's definitely a strength of the model, added to the fact that it comes immediately without conditions, as I mentioned, and it's on a permanent basis. We will see how that model was challenged in the time between 2016 and 2020, and we're starting to lose support, and now is gaining support back because it is a good model, and every good model just should have support from all of us. So a word about Sam Chamberis from Pathways New York, who developed a model because he saw people on the street in New York intoxicated with alcohol, who told him basically that what they needed was an apartment. It was pretty obvious, right? He went to City Hall. He told the officials there that I have a number of people on the street who are stuck there. I think we need to change the model. And it became this very effective model that we now use at the national level. Sam Chamberis borrowed from Bill Anthony's work at Boston University, setting up the first psychiatric treatment programs in the country in the 1970s and 80s, because the principles, the values like putting people first, finding ways to say yes, and letting people drive their own rebuilding process, all these principles are inherently good in rehabilitation. So Tsemberis borrowed from Anthony, and other people have since, of course, borrowed from him. For instance, in dual recovery, Minkoff, who is a guru of dual recovery, a psychiatrist, has also borrowed from Anthony. And at Friendship Place, since it's part of my background, we actually work with Anthony's team in a provider I worked for years ago in Massachusetts. We were a field implementation site. We at Friendship Place, our model is derived, of course, from the BU model and blended with other parts of human services, of course, other approaches. Trauma-informed care, for instance, is essential now for us, and we can talk about that after. What happened in 2008 was critical in the field in that many people were destabilized economically. And at Friendship Place and in other organizations, it really changed the clientele who presented for services. At Friendship Place, it just made us switch to new models, develop models like Job First and rapid rehousing for veterans. At the national level, it also had an impact. So the crisis happened in 2008. By 2010, the Obama administration set a first ever goal for an administration to end homelessness. This had never happened before. And then set off to develop programs like supported services for veterans' families, which is the model and program that we are involved in with VA funding at Veterans First. And when we say families, one person is a family, just if you're wondering about that. Everybody is a family, basically. So this is rapid rehousing. And in many ways, rapid rehousing as a model had been struggling until then. But VA researched it so well with a team out of the University of Pennsylvania led by Dennis Culhane, that it actually became a very effective model that could be applied nationwide and work. And now actually rapid rehousing has gained so much as among other models, in comparison to other models, that it is the first model you offer, hoping that it's a fit. It may or may not be a fit, but it is effective and cost effective. And in homeless services, of course, we always have to make sure that what we do works and that what we do is economical, because we need, of course, to save our resources. There are a lot of people we need to serve. So VA is really the team at the national level that gave credit to this model that is now a very important part of homeless services. And we've had the opportunity to present at conferences with Dennis Culhane and John Kuhn, who leads SSVF at VA on the national level. So we've been very fortunate to be a part of that at Friendship Place. After that, more solutions were needed, what we call rapid solutions at Friendship Place. Interventions you can introduce to help people rebuild in 3 to 8 or 9 months, let's say. And so we developed Job First, our own model. We joined SSVF the first year in 2011. The same year, we developed Job First, a model for employment, which assumes employability, quickly works with the person to build up the confidence level, and then puts people in front of employers in 90 days or less and to perform hires. It's quite an interesting model. We have presented it at the national level in many conferences by now, and DC adopted it in its own legislation a couple of years ago and is now funding it, but not at the level we want. We would like more funding to go to job placement, because we feel that people in homelessness need jobs now, right? It's hard to wait for a job when you live in homelessness. Other models that were not getting traction before are now being recognized, and we will hear it in the plan that I'm going to talk to you about later on. And one of them is prevention. Prevention simply did not have a good reputation. People didn't think that you got a big bang for your buck, basically, with prevention, that people receiving prevention services were likely to solve on their own anyway. But the period of destabilization is really a very difficult one, particularly for families, right? And how things get disorganized can create more of a situation in terms of rebuilding after. So now prevention and looking upstream before the downward spiral activates, and certainly something we're looking at Friendship Place as well, is nationally recognized as a best practice. Diversion also, where you actually help people not enter the services at all, but get creative by maybe strengthening a multi-generational household with food cards, something like that. Let's say grandma has said to a young couple, you can't stay, I can't feed you after the 15th of the month. You then offer food support for 6 months while the two people in the couple look for work, and then the household is stabilized and can stay together. That's an example of diversion, for instance. So we were making really great progress, and homelessness was steadily going down. You'll see with the figures I'm going to present after this, until the period of 2016 to 2020, when the Trump administration was in place. And unfortunately, during that period, homelessness went up 6%, which was significant. One of the reasons was, frankly, that that homelessness was not a priority for the Trump administration. We know that, and down to the fact that USICH under President Trump was led by somebody whose practices were highly unconventional, and somebody who actually had presented the possibility and was hired by several cities to take people out of downtown areas and put them away in a suburban location where they would stay. And that's how this person brought down homelessness in his eyes. So we went through a lot during that period, but we're going to see that thanks to what was put in place in 2020, despite COVID and despite the stresses it brought, things have gotten better. So I'm going to pause here before I go into how we count to see if you have any questions.
Anyone have any questions they want to drop in the chat, or I guess even raise your hand here?
Chat is fine, yes. And if we don't, we can wait till after. It's really all right too.
Okay,
Good.
but definitely,
Right.
folks should think about questions to
Yes,
ask
well,
at the end.
yes, absolutely. Good. So we count people in homelessness once a year for HUD, for Housing and Urban Development, the federal office. And the reason we count, of course, is for planning purposes, to see how many people are out there needing support, to see what the resources should be, what the funding should be, and also to measure, hopefully, our progress, because this work to end homelessness is a national movement. And I think that, it's something we need to keep in mind, that at Friendship Place, in our own way, as a regional services provider with a national impact through the best practices that we present at conferences and all the advocacy work that we do at the local and national level, we are part of a movement. And that's quite obvious to some of us who joined homeless services from other fields. It's actually exciting to work in homeless services because we are developing the practices as we go along, and we're seeing that these practices actually have an impact, that they're working. So we count once a year usually, but you will see that the reference year for 2022, which is the last count available, January of 2022, when it was performed, the reference year for that year is 2020, because in 21, there was incomplete data across the country. And so HUD is comparing figures from 2022 to back to 2020. You will also see when I go into subpopulations and how they are progressing or falling behind in terms of homelessness, that there is no data available on seniors. And I want to flag that right away, because seniors is a very important end of the services in terms of planning. It is a subpopulation that really needs our attention. There are two ways people experience homelessness as seniors. Some seniors age into subsequent cycles of homelessness. They have been homeless in the past at different points in their lives. And as a result, they are more knowledgeable of the system, they're more resilient, they're more streetwise, and they fare relatively better, which doesn't mean that they don't need our help, by the way, but they tend to do better because they know the system and they have a network, let's say. The other way for seniors to experience homelessness is to become homeless after retirement, because there is quite a change in income level for most people, and to find yourself in a situation where you cannot compete on the rental market, and the rental market is tightening anyway, as we know. So these seniors are more vulnerable and need to be supported in a different way, but generally senior services need some attention. And unfortunately, in this report, there are no figures on senior services. Another thing to keep in mind is that during calendar 22, a lot of resources were expended by the administration and trickled down to the state, county, and local levels. And so we are hoping that the count for 23, which will be performed very soon now, will be a lot better in terms of our progress toward ending homelessness. So keep in mind that, you know, that certainly will make a difference. And the administration, through the American Rescue Plan, has provided a lot of additional resources to keep people in place. So to understand these figures, you also need to think that there are factors that drove homelessness up at that stage, with like COVID-induced economic stressors and increasing rental costs, also natural disasters like Hurricane Ida. So 3 factors that would tend to bring numbers up, and then a factor that brought numbers down, certainly lowering the rate of homelessness. It is the large investment in homeless assistance through the American Rescue Plan that activated in 21, and certainly with a lot of impact on 22. And so between these factors, we have an increase in homelessness between 2020 and 2022 of only 0.3%. We had 582,462 people counted in 2022. And again, this very slight increase of 0.3% between the 2 years. I want to point out, though, that 0.3% still means close to 2,000 people. So it's a lot of people. And if you're among those people, you want something to be done, right, to get rehoused. Overall, homelessness is down 8.6% since 2010, even though, again, we had this increase of 6% in the years between 16 and 20. 2 of every 5 people experiencing homelessness were living in an unsheltered situation, and we're going to talk about unsheltered homelessness more. Overall, though, the result is fairly good, if you will allow that comment, because we could have seen a dramatic increase in homelessness during the COVID years, right? And we've managed to keep that number down, which was really good. So now let's talk about unsheltered homelessness, which is up and is a main concern for us in DC. For instance, it's the encampments, right, that have spread through different areas of the city, where people seem to be very reluctant to go into shelters. And there are new models being implemented in different parts of the country to help resolve the issues around encampments in a humane and effective way. But there's also criminalization of unsheltered homelessness in some jurisdictions that is problematic. So we want to continue, of course, to move in the direction of being effective and more humane in the approach by providing solutions, housing solutions, whether they are short-term or long-term, to people in the encampments. But unsheltered homelessness is up by 3.4% since 2020 and only 1% since 2010. Family homelessness is down, and that's a good thing. A lot of resources have been expended to serve families, and certainly this city, which, by the way, is an example for the rest of the country, given all the amazing new programs we have developed in the last 10 to 12 years. And so I just want to say that DC is a city that a lot of other cities look at, and kudos to Laura Zeilinger and Mayor Bowser and their teams, and to all the providers like us, of course, for all this excellent work done in the city. So in our city, for instance, we've developed short-term housing facilities for families like the Brooks and other supports. And so nationally, family homelessness is down 5.5%. That's close to 3,000 families not experiencing homelessness anymore since 2020, and down 36% since 2010. So obvious progress. And, we can borrow from that end of the field to see what has worked there and to apply it to singles, because we will see just a little bit later on that single homelessness is up, chronic homelessness is up, and in that group, of course, we're looking at singles, and we need to do better for singles. Veteran homelessness is down. With supportive services for veterans' families, again, the program that we're involved in with close to 350 other providers in the country, funded by VA, as I mentioned. Homelessness is down among veterans, and that's a good thing, 11% since 2020 and 55% since 2010. So you see that decision to set a goal to end homelessness by the Obama administration, and then followed, of course, by the right level of support and the funding and the organizing at different levels, local, county, state, etc., has really worked for veterans. This is a program that we can learn a lot from. It's working. And by the way, SSVF has support from both sides of the aisle. And this is a good thing at this stage, right? Since Congress the House just went to the Republicans, we want to make sure that Democrats and Republicans can work together to continue to fund these resources, because it's essential to keep the funding stream going with all this, of course. Chronic homelessness is up. And as I just mentioned, chronic homelessness, of course, for that, we look at singles, right? Because the great majority of people in chronic homelessness are single people. We knew in DC and elsewhere that this would become an issue. We were trying to catch up, but maybe not fast enough. We can't always do everything right, but this is a window of opportunity for us. We've already started to talk to the city about increasing singles programming. Valley Place, for instance, is a perfect example of that. This new short-term housing, bridge housing facility that we run for the city in Anacostia, allowing people to go from homelessness into permanent housing in 90 days or under. Perfect example of what the city will do, is willing to do, and should do more of to help singles. Just because somebody is single doesn't mean that they should, of course, be left behind on the street. So unfortunately, the numbers are not good there. Chronic homelessness is up 15.5% since 2020 and 20.4% since 2010. So again, we need to do more in that area. Youth homelessness is down. And youth homelessness is also an area that has support from both sides of the aisle, which is a good thing. It has support from both sides of the aisle, primarily because of youth trafficking and the fact that neither one of the two sides politically wants to hear that more youth are being trafficked. And so this is essential for us and something that we can build on when we have conversations with politicians on the Hill to continue to grow this system. So we're talking about youth who are called unaccompanied youth, and often they function in small groups. And homelessness for that group is down 12% since 2020 and 21.4% since 2017. The reference here is different there. So this is really good. And it's even down for parenting youth. You know that we serve a number of parenting youth at Friendship Place and in the system at large, particularly youth who have graduated from foster care, who are at great risk of becoming homeless later in life, but not so many years after they leave foster care, often coming to us with babies and toddlers, for instance, and needing to gain parenting skills. But the stats show that by 26, their chance of becoming homeless at the country level is 31 to 46%, so pretty high. And for parenting youth, homelessness is also down 13% since 2020 and 31% since 2017. So these are the subpopulations. We do not have figures on seniors, as I mentioned, or for instance, separate so far on returning citizens, people coming out of incarceration, or members of the LGBTQ community. But you will see that the plan focuses on these subpopulations in a desire to be more equitable as a country. And so it's interesting that we are now looking at these new subpopulations, and I'm sure that we'll be attempting to count these groups better. It's not always easy to count groups well, but I'm sure that in years to come, we will be focusing on counting these groups more effectively so we know where we are in that area. So the next topic for this count is race and ethnicity. There is systemic racism, which is obvious with its results in our country, in people of color experiencing homelessness at a much higher rate than other people. For instance, people identifying as Black or African Americans represent 12% of the population, but 37% of people experiencing homelessness. So this is threefold, right? For Native Americans in the plan, we now have a count, and that's fivefold, which is a lot. And then for a group like Latinos, a group that has been more challenging to count, according to the folks who wrote the plan, there is now a concern which we did not see before. So this is interesting. Before, we thought that maybe we did not see as many people from the Latino community experiencing homelessness because somehow they self-resolved, as we said, somehow they found places to be at night, more than maybe other groups we didn't know. But now the count, the plan is actually saying, recognizing the fact that it has been more challenging to count the members of that community, and that now what we are seeing is sort of maybe the tip of something, the tip of an iceberg, and that we ought to pay closer attention to the way we count people in that community, because between 2020 and 2022, homelessness in the Latino community went up 16%, and that's quite high. So I'm going to stop here to see if you have any questions and move on if you don't.
There are a few questions in the chat. Let me call them up. I'm sorry, I just lost my chat. There we go. Bear with me, everyone. Sorry, I just want to call it up here. One question, we'll start at the top here. Do we have any details on job opportunities that we connect people with, or data how long people remain in their jobs? What can you talk about our employment services?
We do, yes. So we keep track of that at Friendship Place, for instance. We look at retention at 90, 180, and 360 days. And so it may not be with the same job because people may change jobs during the year. So we look at people who are employed. And if I remember well, we were at 52% at the year mark and just under 70 before that, which is good in terms of the national average for one of these programs at Job First. But when we have more current figures, we'll be happy to share them and maybe have one of these webinars on Job First. Lindy?
Yeah, thank you so much. I asked the question, could you say a little bit more about how you make the links to potential employers?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and some of the range of opportunities that the folks have to begin their re-entry process.
Yes. So, and a lot, speaking of re-entry, it's real re-entry for many returning citizens who come our way for a job placement when they come out of incarceration. Often about a third of our caseload on an annual basis. And so we tap into the DC Metro job market, as wide as it is, look for what jobs are needed and train in that direction, meaning that with the people involved, we have to help people become aware of a skill set they have that they can get paid for now. Now is essential, right? As I said earlier. And it may not be the skill set that they were using before they became destabilized or homeless. And we have folks in both situations at Aim Higher, folks who are destabilized and really very close to homelessness, and folks who are already homeless. But it's a job market in general. So the hospitals, the hotels, the solar industry, it's as wide as you can imagine, because our population in that program really is, represents a cross section. We've placed, for instance, 4 or 5 lawyers downtown in the last 12 years we've been in operation. We've worked with former CEOs, former college professors, and we work with a lot of people in the service industry, landscaping, again, food and beverage. So
okay, one last question. I will keep quiet after this. Can you provide training yourselves, or do you work with contractors to provide training?
We have expedited training, and we put the job placement first. We believe that, so some contracts now require to do some level of training, but we expedite it because we know that people need jobs, and our entire model right on the fact that it's job first. So you go for the job first, you train after, if the person wants professional development, once they're in place. And that's what we're really advocating for at the local and national level. We would like the whole order to change. We would like people to prioritize job placement even as they fund services in their jurisdictions, and to not prioritize vocational training as it is now. We think that too much money is spent on vocational training and producing limited outcomes. And we think that job placement would produce better outcomes.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Let me just raise 1 or 2 other questions, if you don't mind, in the chat. First of all, Regina, you had asked a question about how the numbers are identified. Chris Petticelli, thank you. It looks like you did a very thorough job in answering Regina's question. So Regina, unless that didn't answer your question, I'll move on, but please let me know if Chris Petticelli's response, and again, Chris, thank you, didn't cover your question. Susan Price, you asked, how are the homeless numbers that we're seeing affected by the influx of immigrants we see coming into the country?
So the migrants who come to DC on the buses, and I hear now through the airports, are served in a different system. So homeless services is not impacted at this stage, and the migrants do not come in our city-funded system. The city is developing separate resources for them, and that's the way that's organized.
Very good. And then the only other thing in the chat was a personal one to me, noting that a webinar on our job fairs, and I guess really aim higher writ larger would be great. And Jenna, yes, that's a great idea. We should work on that as we do these every couple of weeks. So thank you for the idea. All right,
and remember that you can all help us find employers, people you know who need people, right? Everybody needs people these days, including Friendship Place, by the way. So you can all help us with, you know, referrals, and just put somebody in touch with Richard McKee or David Vicenti, and when they have openings. So just to comment on these numbers, the number I gave you, which is just under 500,000, is a one-day account. It's on, the phrase used is on any single night. It does not encompass all the people experiencing homelessness in the country during the year. Some experts say that you should multiply that by 3 about, and then if you add the number of people doubled up, you're in, you know, well over 6 or 7 million people who are doubled up, don't control their own living situations through mortgages or leases, and are at a risk for homelessness that's elevated. And some people say that we were pre-COVID about 7 million units short of where we need to be for housing. Just to give you a picture that's, you know, wider than a one-day count. We always like to do that. Our share of that count in 2022 in DC was 4,400 or so, in the region 7,600, both numbers down progressively, with obviously the higher concentration for us in DC. You always see more concentration for homelessness in the urban centers, and we're the urban center for the entire region. So it's only par for the course that we have more people experiencing homelessness within the city, where the resources are also, whether they're natural resources like people walking by helping you with a sandwich or some money or some water, or the resources the system pays for. So we were through the pandemic at an increased risk for evictions, of course, when we started, and the American Rescue Plan of 2021 is the plan that poured a lot of money into the country to stabilize households. And again, there was this factor that could have added a lot of evictions and brought up the rate of homelessness when the moratorium ended. But the American Rescue Plan was there to solidify these households and keep people in place. The rate of people who don't have any confidence in their ability to pay rent or are behind and fear evictions didn't change that much between 21, now is the reference year for this, it's not one from the count, and 22. No confidence, 13% the first year, 12.5% the second. People who are afraid of evictions, 48% within that group who have no confidence in their ability to pay rent, about the same. Behind on rent, 19% to 15%. But the figure to look at that's more problematic for us is that 50% of renters earning less than 25,000 a year, so a very small budget, 50% of these renters are behind on their rents. And that's a big issue with the tightening rental market that made it so that 12% of renters have said that their rents went up $250 a month or more after the end of the moratorium. You know that there's a question whether actually some landlords are taking advantage and bringing their rents up too high because the system is somehow providing some resources to the renters. We have to look at that and maybe at a way to undo that trend. So now I'm going to talk to you about the plan that was released in December, and it's called All In, and it's called All In for a reason. It's all hands on deck. We can all do something at whatever level we are, whether we're volunteers or staff, work at the local, county, state, or federal level. Everybody needs to do something to get involved with this plan. The plan is the federal strategic plan to prevent and end homelessness. It is the most ambitious plan an administration has ever produced. It was developed by the US Interagency Council on Homelessness, now led by a great executive director, Jeff Olivet, after consultations throughout the country. So you understand, US Interagency Council on Homelessness is a council of 19 federal agencies. You have all the right ones, HUD, Health and Human Services, VA, labor, etc. So very people who control resources are at the table working on this. Jeff Olivet is somebody we know very well because he helped us years ago start our anti-racism work, and he's been a wonderful advocate at the national level, and I had the opportunity to meet with him twice since he took office, and he's really determined to do something about homelessness. It's a bold but achievable goal to reduce homelessness by 25% by January of 2025. So you can see where it lines up with the last 2 years of this current administration. It's deeply rooted in equity. I'll go over that again when I give you more detail on this. It affirms life experience. Life experience is, of course, working and getting advice, as we do at Friendship Place, from the most important people, the people who have been there and experienced homelessness. The phrase life expertise is now used also. The plan reaffirmed housing first, this model that is so effective that we use at Friendship Place, that I told you about. Housing first was losing traction. There were attacks in Congress from the conservative side saying, along with this questionable leadership at Usage, saying that housing first just didn't work, because if it worked, why would there be more people on the street? Well, for so many different reasons, right? Like economic factors, number one, and lack of access to mental health care or addiction care, but not because the model did not work. The model does work. So the plan reaffirms the model, which is a good thing. It also introduces or reaffirms the notion that housing is a social determinant of health. So housing is now seen as a medical intervention, without which the likelihood that people are going to get better is much lower, right? And that you have a much better chance to regain your health or staying healthy with the challenges you have in your life if you are housed. So housing is a social determinant of health. This is a milestone, really. It encourages new initiatives and creativity, and we love that at Friendship Place, so this is good. It promotes collaboration at all levels. So, there was a call last year at the national conference I attended for providers to really stick together and come together and not somehow criticize each other too much, because this is a big movement and we all need to work together, right? We may have slightly different ideas on things, but so collaboration will be key in this plan, and also at all level of the federal system, and leadership will be sought at all level of the federal system, and also given to people with life experience, of course. It also is based on evidence-based practices, science, right? Where before we were hearing that the model doesn't work because there are more people on the street. That's not science. Science is when you evaluate properly, when you put money into evaluation and see how your approaches are working, and maybe you need to go in a slightly different direction 1 year, and because you're seeing new signs that things could be better that way. So we'll have more of that. This year, the US Interagency Council on Homelessness will engage right away. They're studying now with local jurisdictions to build up their strategic plan. So there'll be a usage person, a contact person funded by the federal government, working with local jurisdictions to enhance their plans, which is a very good thing. A message from Jeff Olivet is, let's not blame people experiencing homelessness for the fact that they are in homelessness, right? Which there was some of that, we know, in the years I mentioned also. That is simply not fair. And a recognition in the letter that precedes, that is part of the plan, and to introduce it, that homelessness is due to a systems failure. And if it's a systems failure, then we ought to fix it, but we shouldn't blame people experiencing homelessness for the fact that they are. There's a recognition that employment is important, and we like that at Friendship Place. You know, that job first advocacy part is big for us. I was so glad to see that. It's taken a long time for some people to realize that job placement needs to be one of these services offered, obviously, and funded properly. There are some new models to engage encampments that are getting some notice, and I'm really glad about that. It's simply not fair to arrive at an encampment, remove tents, maybe take people's belongings because you're not paying attention. Engaging encampments needs to be done the right way. And then this recognition of systemic racism. So a desire to have more equity in our system and actions to get to that for people of color, again, who experience homelessness at a higher rate, but also for several subgroups like people with disabilities, seniors, LGBTQ+, and returning citizens. And the plan acknowledges the fact that mass incarceration, which is another phenomenon in our country, has had a direct impact on homelessness. The plan rides on 3 foundation pillars and 3 solution pillars. I'm going to give you a brief overview, given the time we have left, of these pillars. The foundation pillars: to lead with equity, so to fight inequity, obviously, number 1. Number 2, to use data and evidence to make decisions, which is where you should be in homeless services, in any kind of human services. Number 3, collaboration at all levels of the system. So these are the foundation pillars, 3 of them, and 3 solution pillars. You know, we like the word solution at Friendship Place. We use it a lot. People need solution when they're experiencing homelessness. Number 1 of the solutions: scale housing and supports that meet the demand. So look at what the demand really is and go in that direction. Don't leave people behind. Get the resources you need. Number 2, improve effectiveness within the system and the response to homelessness. So by being a bit critical also about the system, what could we do better? What doesn't work anymore? What should we invest in that works now? You know, we keep up with the trends at Friendship Place, and it's really essential. Homelessness is an ever-evolving phenomenon in our country. And then invest in prevention. And you know that we were early proponents of prevention at Friendship Place. We did it before and sometimes got criticized by it for it, by the way, but did it before it got recognition as a model. So more funding on the federal side for Native Americans living on and off tribal lands, for instance. A look at policies perpetuating racism and other disparities. A strengthening of the federal capacity to provide good data. Opportunity for research and innovation, leadership, again, and more sharing. And for the models we have at Friendship Place: prevention, diversion, upstream, rapid rehousing, housing first, permanent supportive housing, trauma-informed care, mental health and addiction, evidence-based practice, and coordinated entry. They want to do more about sheltering. Sheltering has fallen behind. Some people are targeting smaller numbers for shelters, leaving people on the street. So this is a great new plan that I encourage you to look at. And again, it's called the All-In, the Federal Strategic Plan to Prevent and End Homelessness. If you want to look for it, just type something like Biden-Harris homelessness, and it comes up. All right, enough. A few minutes for questions.
Yes, thank you, Jean-Michel. That was a very thorough overview of where we stand and how we got here. And yes, we do have a few more minutes for questions. Anybody have thank you, Lynn's Lynn's applauding as we're there.
Thank you, Lynn. Appreciate that.
And any other questions, comments, observations? Anyone from our program teams? I know we have a number of people from our programmatic activities who are on the call, and thank you. That's very exciting. Anything you want to add about some of the work you're doing in a sentence or two while we have a minute or two? I don't want to call anyone out in particular and embarrass anybody, but if anyone wants to weigh in. Here's a question in the chat. What are our top priorities for 2023? If we had to say, Alexandra, I'm going to actually refine, edit your question a little bit to say, Jean-Michel, what are our top 2 or 3 things we want to make sure we get done in 2023?
Well, certainly with this new plan, it's to work with the local and national partners to make sure that we can play our part and be supportive of the system and join in and see what we can add in a small way. And certainly, so that's, at the top of the list for me. This is an exciting year when you get a plan like that released just a month before the start of the new year that has so much in it and was so impressively developed. I think it draws you in. You want to do something, you want to do your part. Number 2, I think, to look at our funding base and to try to, diversify it more, of course, always at Venture Place, try to see what the new options are there. And in direct relation with this, we have applied for rapid rehousing for returning citizens and people identifying as LGBTQ+ from HUD. This is the first time we could do a whole presentation on HUD and what it's doing. It's the first time HUD looks at unsheltered homelessness and align with the principles and values of the administration. So we are hoping to be funded. It will be first time rapid rehousing funding in the district that can go outside of the district boundaries, which is really good to add flexibility. And 3, staffing. We need staff. So that's high on the list also. We need help in quite a few of the programs, and we are really going to focus on what we can do in that area to keep people longer at Venture Place, but also to attract new people. And as some of you know, in the fall, we've already given equity increases across the board. So we're really investing in our staff group, building our culture, of course, also.
Great. Thank you. Well, we are at 1 o'clock, everyone. So thank you again. And we had such a great turnout. I was doing the math in my head. We had 60 people come and go over the course of this, which is phenomenal for one of these. And so thank you. Thank you for giving us an hour out of your day. I know that your time is valuable too. So we want to be respectful of that. So thank you. And we do these, for those who are new to coming to one of these webinars, we do these every 3 to 4 weeks. So we'll do 1 or 2 over the course of the month of February. More details to come on that. I can tell you we definitely are going to do one on our LGBTQ work. We actually just today set a date of March and I'm going to apologize now. I just said it, so I'm not remembering it. March 21st. We'll do something around our LGBTQ work. Some more details to come, but we'll do a couple of more before then. That just happens to be the next one we set up. Anyhow, thank you everyone for your time. And as I said earlier, thank you for your support of our work. I'm glad you found this information useful, and we record this, and so we'll post this on our YouTube page forthwith. I know Julianne was on the call, and so Julianne, I'll send you the link as soon as we get it done. Take care. Thank you, Chris Petticelli, and thank you for your very detailed answer to the question above. I much appreciate that. So everyone, I'm going to stop recording now and wish you a great afternoon. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Be well. We appreciate
Thank you, Jean-Michel and staff.
Bye.
Thank you.